This is our fourth and final session of our series for third, fourth, and fifth grade teachers on the Common Core State Standards for Mathematics. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so just to draw your attention once more, if you have any questions as you listen to this webinar or as you start working on math standards, I would invite you to email me at the email address there on the screen, kcarpenter@mathteachingtools.com, and would appreciate any feedback on this series as well. And we'll talk at the end how to find the rest of the series as well as the rest of the sessions in this series. So this is our session 4 of 4. All right, so today we are going to look at the content domain of measurement and data for this grade band. In the past, we have dealt with fractions and we've dealt with geometry, and so we'll finish by looking at this, and you'll see some connections with geometry in particular. We'll talk about some issues that you want to think about as you teach these standards, and then of course how to assess for student understanding. If you've received the link for this session, you can feel free to share this with anyone. We don't password protect it or require people to do anything to access it other than hit the link. And if anyone is live, you can submit questions in the chat bar during the webinar. Okay. So as we've talked about in prior sessions, I'll just mention here briefly these 5 shifts that are happening with the Common Core. As we look at measurement and data standards in particular, you'll want to take a look at kind of the lens through which the standard writers wrote them. Because in some of them, it's a little bit of a different take than maybe we're used to. And so we're going to talk about that. It helps us focus our efforts with these standards, but we'll have to definitely study them. And some of them, for instance, have pretty specific instruction on how the concept is to be taught. We'll look, as I mentioned before, at kind of the vertical coherence as well as the horizontal coherence and how the ideas are connected. And then, of course, the bottom 3 topics, shifts there, all fall under the umbrella of rigor. And what does it mean to do mathematics at a rigorous level? And so, especially with this idea of marrying the conceptual understanding with the skill of measurement and data, we're going to look at that. So, let's jump right in. Today in third grade, we're going to talk about a few of the standards for this domain, not all of them, but we're going to actually focus our efforts for the whole grade band on this topic of geometric measurement. Because it may be a different approach than what we've looked at in the past. So we spent a lot of time building up to third grade with this idea of measurement in the sense of linear measurement and the transition from non-standard units to standard units. And so in third grade, we kind of pick this up and we extend this idea of standard units to the idea of area and relating the area to multiplication and to addition. And I think that's a really important thing to notice here, that we are not just telling kids the formula for area. We have to be very careful when we do that. And so if we look at these standards even just to start with, standard number 5 here, recognize area as an attribute of plane figures. That is a very important part of the standard. And so we have to start by thinking about what does it mean to measure. And if you ask maybe your colleagues as well as your students, if you ask them what measurement is, they will more than likely say something like, well, you use a ruler, or you do length times width, or you just do something like that, or you do something, what the emphasis is being on doing. And it's important to make the distinction between the process of measurement and the concept of measurement. And we have to start with the concept of measurement. And that's what this standard 5 is about. That the notion of measurement is assigning a numeral or a number to a characteristic of an object. That's the concept of measurement. What most people are describing when they describe measurement, they describe the process of measurement. And so we need to spend a good amount of time in third grade reinforcing the idea that measurement is using a number to describe an attribute. And that's exactly what we're saying in Standard 5. In particular, we're talking about what is the definition of a unit square, what's the definition of finding the area, what's the concept of finding the area. It's not the process. And so the concept of finding the area is doing this complete covering of unit squares with no gaps and no overlap. Now, let's talk about the vertical coherence here for a moment. We have standards in kindergarten through second grade, number 1, that talk about attributes. So children should come to you having a sense of about what an attribute is versus what an attribute is not when it comes to geometry and it comes to defining shape. Now, if they don't, that may be something you need to fill in these gaps here. They should also come to you with experience in linear measurement, knowing that we are not to have gaps and overlap. And so that can then be extended into the idea of area measurement in this instance. So this standard number 5 is of equal importance as standard number 6 here, which talks about we're going to count unit squares to do this. And it gives you the 4 common units that people need to use: square centimeter, square meter, square inches, square feet, but also this idea of improvised units, where children have to maybe measure with some kind of, tiling, if you will, that may not be a standard unit. They might measure with the hexagons from the pattern block or something like that. But you can see how this standard 5 and 6 go together with the idea of the area is a covering, and it involves covering with a, some kind of standardized unit. In most instances, it is a square unit, but it's also a completeness of covering where there are no gaps and no overlap. So that's an important distinction to make. So far, we have only related it to addition. But if we look at the next standard, which I apologize for the font size, but I wanted to get this all on one slide. This is still under that big geometric measurement umbrella. But now we're going to relate it to the operation. And so you see here in choices A through D of this standard 7, some very specific instructions, if you will, about what it means to teach area in relation to the operations of multiplication and addition. So we have to have tiling involved, which means we have to get the materials out. We cannot jump to pure symbol manipulations too quickly. And students, I don't like this word show. I'd rather kind of make it a partnership discovery thing where you guide them to know that the area is the same as you would find as multiplying the side length. And then you see then in part B, you operationalize that. So we're going to then use whole number products to find rectangular areas. We'll get the fractional, ones at future grade level. Then we're going to extend that then for part C is this area demonstration of the distributive property. So if you have a rectangle that's, 7 by 21, you can break that up into 2 rectangles, in order to make those pieces and parts easier to do with mental math. And so we start this idea of the distributive property in third grade without necessarily teaching, the general case of it, but we use it through this demonstration of rectangles and cutting up rectangles. Then part D in this standard is the notion that we can find the area of non-standard shapes. Rectilinear just means rectangular shapes. that aren't necessarily rectangles. And so we have these just, figures, and the idea is that we can cut them apart, find the areas of those pieces and parts, and put them back together. That's a very important concept for kids to understand. And that's one, again, if we think about vertical coherence in kindergarten through second grade, they have had experiences with doing that with just understanding shapes. So they might take a shape that looks like a house and cut it into a square or a rectangle with a triangle on top. They might take an ice cream cone looking shape and cutting it into, a cone and a half sphere on top. And so those are two big ideas that have been building, that not only can we, number one, decompose shapes, but number two, we can understand the shape by looking at those pieces that we've cut apart. So that's an understanding that if children come to you in third grade and haven't had that, you may need to do some, kind of on-the-spot remediation with that concept. So let's look at one third grade task. And because we have so many standards kind of look through today, I'm only pulling one task per grade level just to keep it from being too much this afternoon. So really, if we look at these two slides we just looked at, our big focus in third grade is this idea of developing the concept of area and developing the concept of how to measure the area, and then connecting it to that numerical computation.